morning, I suppose. It's 12:45. Welcome back to class. Always good to see you guys here, as usual, at our meetings. This is our second week of virtual class meetings. Next week, we will start the face-to-face component of the class, and then going forward, they'll just be, in-person meetings. But we're going to take care of these two lectures today and Thursday, and then that'll be our next step afterwards. Nice, Armand. I'm glad to hear you got a new high score. I wonder what it is. Are you playing the Nintendo version of Tetris? Well, you'll let me know maybe. But either way, guys, okay, so welcome back to Phil A165, Theory of Knowledge. I have a couple of notes to just mention in terms of review from last week's meeting, and then we'll continue with where we left off. All right, and why not just sort of to say hello and also just kind of keep an informal record of attendance. If you want to leave a comment in the chat, and then that'll be a part of my records if I ever need it for any reason. So thank you. Good to see you guys. Hi there. Hey, Armand, Samantha, Colin, Elle, Riley, Elias, Hayden, Haley, Alex, Armand, Han, Shad. Good to see everybody once again at the class meeting, and Yuki. Oh yeah, thanks so much. I mean, Peachy's just a unique cat. I don't know if she's an outlier or if most cats are like this, but she's definitely a sweetheart. Okay, and good to see you too, Martin. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here. So let's start off with just a few things to sort of review last class. Last time, it took a lot more class discussion and analysis to get some of these concepts set out on the table. But now that we've gone through them once, this review will just be a kind of lightning round a little bit faster. So I want to ask us about some of our important key concepts and terms, vocabulary items that we started to learn about last Thursday. So first of all, if you think you know the answer to any of the questions that I'm asking, please just give me the information in whatever way you want. You can use the chat or your microphone, camera, as you wish. Starting off with this question. So what is a proposition? Someone will tell me if they remember, what is it? A proposition, what is that? The meaning of a sentence. Very good, Armand, yes. Okay, so the meaning of a sentence is a proposition. Now, you might, like we said before, wonder, why is there a difference between the sentence itself and the meaning of it? Well, there is a difference because there can be different sentences which convey the same information. In that case, they would be different sentences with the same proposition. Exactly as you're saying, Armand. So like in class, I give this example of, say, these two sentences. The snow is white versus der Schnee ist weiß. Now that's the same proposition expressed in two different languages. One English, the other German. Notice that the sentences sound different. The spelling is different. There's a lot that's different between the way they appear and the way they sound, but they don't say different things. They have the same meaning. And that's a general point that holds of any two languages where the same information is expressed by the different languages. German and English have a lot more similarities than, say, like Chinese and English or Arabic and English. But as you know, those same facts could be expressed in those languages as well as possible languages that don't actually exist that could be imagined or conceived of. All right, so proposition, the meaning of a sentence. That's point one. What does it mean when a proposition is true? Someone knows? What does it mean for a statement, a proposition, to be a true one? Something that we talked about also at the last meeting in some detail. So let me see. Okay, great, Mateo. That's right. Also, Catherine. When whatever it says matches the facts of reality. So if I tell you that my cat, or well, one of my two cats, Peach anyway, is on this table, this is true. Okay, now if I told you that a dog is on the table, this is false. I mean, this is elementary and it's obvious, but it's something that can't be overlooked. When there's a sentence, we compare what the sentence says with what the facts are to determine if it's true or not. And every articulate sentence has a truth value. Either it's a fact or that's not the case. So, I use the example of Peach because it's vivid and clear that, it's true that she's on this table. And there's other things that I could say, which of course would be false. Like, I don't know, that I'm wearing a hat or whatever. Okay. Now, what does it mean to believe a proposition? That's another thing to just touch up on. To believe a proposition, what does that mean? So good. When a person thinks that a proposition is true, so just thinking that a statement is true taking it to be true, agreeing with it, means that you believe it. And yes, Han, it's a subjective state to believe a proposition because you could be wrong. You can sometimes, of course, believe things to be the case which are not. And we all know there's so many examples of that. There could be a person who believes that the world is flat, but it's not. Of course, to the statement that it's flat, they think that's the fact. To the statement that it's round, they don't agree. They don't think that's true. And so concerning that proposition, of course, people could disagree. I use that as an example, but I don't want to overdo it too much. I don't want you guys to think that there's a real healthy, substantial contingent of people that think it's flat. I mean, that's a totally wild and extreme, irrational view, but there are some. So I just use it as an example. We could use other cases that are a little more ordinary, like, I don't know, two jurors that don't agree on the question of guilt after hearing the evidence in court. Okay, now anyway, so we said what's proposition, what's truth, what's belief, what is justification? That's something to know. Okay, thanks, Riley, Armand, all of you guys. It is having good evidence or reasons to support your beliefs, yes. So if you think a statement is true, but you have nothing to say to back it up, then that's a belief, yeah, but it's not justified. So it has the status of a justified belief when you are aware of reasons and information, evidence that could bolster, that could support it, that could somehow corroborate it. Okay, so like believing that, I don't know, let me think of a good example. Believing that your partner's cheating on you, but you have no reason to think so, might be unjustified. But if you have a whole bunch of detailed information that's familiar to you, like their text message history, the kind of hours that they are keeping, whatever, then you might get some evidence towards that claim or that belief. It's just a random example, but we can imagine other cases. You think someone has committed a crime, but there's no facts to support it. On the other hand, we can imagine a case where you have detailed evidence, DNA evidence, footprint, fingerprint evidence, and that would add justification to the claim or belief. Okay, now an epistemic agent, that we can make short work of that. That's just any type of being that is even capable of just having beliefs or knowledge. So interesting point to notice that not everything in the universe is an epistemic agent. Like I mentioned last week, that this marker is not an epistemic agent. It's not got beliefs. It's not got thoughts or ideas. So it takes a cognitive system in order to even form beliefs. And fortunately, I think, we are beings that have that kind of cognitive sophistication, and we can form beliefs and we can have knowledge. Maybe there are other beings out there that also are epistemic agents. Certainly on the planet Earth, I would hazard to say that the great apes, many of the mammals, and even lower down the tree of life, there's plenty of things that at least have rudimentary beliefs. Nothing on a par with the depth and breadth of human knowledge. And then there's also the question of whether there could ever be life forms outside of this planet that have knowledge and beliefs too. Okay, so putting all that information together, we said that according to the ancient Greeks, and we had a nice discussion of the life and events of Socrates and also his student Plato, going way back in the day, 2,400 years ago roughly, when Socrates and Plato walked the earth, they and the tradition that followed them argued in favor of a certain definition of knowledge. There's 3 of those conditions that are included in it. So let's see if we could just get that out there. They say of knowledge that it was what? Correct, that it's a justified true belief. So in order to know proposition, first of all, someone would have to think it is true at a minimum. That means they believe it. Because you can't know something that you don't believe, right? You cannot know, for example, that the earth is flat. Well, first of all, because it isn't, but also because I hope you don't believe it. I don't know, here's a weird example. You remember in the days of Obama when there were people that were like making this false claim that he wasn't born in America and everything? So like to those people, they don't know that he was born in this country because they refuse to believe it. So like you can't know something if you yourself disqualify yourself from having the status of knowledge because you don't believe this thing. So a belief is a first step, but it's not enough that you just believe something. To know something, it requires that it's a correct or true belief. Obviously, you've taken enough tests in school to realize that when you fill in the wrong answer, an incorrect answer, a false answer, no one says you knew the answer because it was incorrect. So minimally, you have to have a belief which is true. But even if you have those 2/3 of the definition met, it's still not enough if you don't have evidence justification for support on that belief. Okay, so suppose someone thinks something's true, by the way, it actually is, and they have reasonable evidence to support it. This was what Greek thought said was knowledge. Now, this takes us to the dialogue that I wanted us to dive into in a little more detail today, because we only started to talk about it at the tail end of the last week's meeting. So let's go back into the world of the ancient Greeks and Plato and Socrates, and we're talking about the dialogue called the Meno. Okay, the Meno. Meno is the name of the person that is speaking to Socrates here. He's a Greek general, and he is the namesake of the dialogue. So in this dialogue, they're discussing the concept of knowledge. And forgive me for having a little bit of repetition from some of the things we said at the end, but it's useful, I think, to transition into it slowly. So to start off, here's Socrates talking to Meno. He says this, Meno, a man who knew the way to Larissa or anywhere else you like, and went there and guided others, would surely lead them well and correctly? That's the question, and Meno says, certainly, Socrates. Okay, so just to remind us what's going on here at the opening. They're in Athens while they're talking, and Larissa is a city which is 100 miles to the north, also within Greece. In fact, Meno is originally from Larissa. It's his birthplace, so he's familiar with the reference to the city. Now, Socrates is just asking him a basic question. Suppose now that we're in Athens, that someone has knowledge of how to get to the final destination of Larissa from here. They've made the journey many times. They know the route by heart. So, just to repeat, they know how to get there from where we're at in Athens. If they know how to get to Larissa, couldn't they lead someone there correctly that has never been there? And the answer Meno gives is, of course, certainly, Socrates. I tried to make it relatable to you last time by saying, imagine a place that's far away from where you are right now, but you know how to get there from your current location. Like, I don't know, the campus of Orange Coast College. I'm hoping you know how to get there from where you're at, wherever you're at right now. So since you know how to get to OCC, couldn't you lead a person that's never been there before to that destination because you have knowledge of the route? Sure, okay. Now, Socrates continues. And by the way, if as I'm presenting this, any thoughts, comments, questions, reactions of any kind come to your mind, please let me know, and I'm happy to take them as they come. So the next stage is this. Socrates goes on. He says, okay, Meno, what if someone had had a correct opinion as to which was the way, but had not gone there, nor indeed had any knowledge of it? Would he not also lead correctly? To which Meno answers again, certainly, Socrates. So let's now clarify that. The second question is a bit different. He's now asking him not about what if someone knew how to get there, but what if someone did not know, they had never gone there before, but they do have a correct opinion as to the way. All right. Terminology used here by Plato and Socrates. The words are correct opinion. I can't remember if we discussed this little element of the article, but let's review it if not. If we did, I should say. So correct opinion stands for two of the three conditions included in the definition of knowledge, justified true belief. So what do you think those are synonymous for out of JT and B? Correct opinion. Just think of the words, what they mean. Because I'm telling you, you've got JT and B. There's 2 out of 3 of them that these two things are equivalent to. True belief. That's right, Mateo. So true is a synonymous term with correct. True and correct, same. Opinion, it's a belief. To think something's true is having an opinion. So correct opinion, to be specific, is a true belief, but without that other ingredient, which was what? Justification, right, yes. So a true belief without justification. A true belief without justification, okay? Yeah, sorry, 1 second. This is so random that I keep getting phone calls, but this one will only take 2 seconds, okay? Hello.
Hey, I'm just seeing this now, but I'm already in my car.
Okay, yeah, don't worry. I'm in the middle of class anyway, so it's okay.
Okay.
All right, bye. Sorry, guys. My bad. See, here's the thing. I left a hydro flask at my one and only hydro flask that I've had through all my meetings. I left it in the classroom. Now that we're going back to physical classes, I'm just, it's like scatterbrained, absent-minded professor. So I left it in the classroom. I called a colleague. I said, can you go check They were trying to return the call, but they're not even there. So anyways, let that be gone. Correct opinion, a true belief without justification. Okay, so he asks him this. He says, so suppose someone has a correct opinion, but they don't know how to get there. Couldn't they also lead someone there correctly with a correct opinion? Now, to make this something relatable, I suppose, to you, what is it in the modern day context, like living in 2022 today? What would it be that you might rely on if you're trying to get to a destination, but you've never gone there on your own? So you might use an external tool or aid to support you. Like Google Maps would be my preferred option, yes. I know some people use the Apple Maps on their iPhones, whatever. But some type of like GPS system perhaps would help you. I'm sure we all are used to that at this point in time. So Waze, another app, yeah, that you could use, sure. So think of the question Socrates is asking in this way. He's kind of asking Meno, suppose someone has never gone to Larissa. They don't have the first idea about how to make it from point A to B, but they do have a map, which is correct, and the directions that it has are accurate. So couldn't you just use the correct map, even if you don't know by heart on your own how to get there, and use that to lead people there? And Meno says, certainly, Socrates, once again. So Socrates follows up with him. He says, as long as he has the right opinion about that of which the other has knowledge, he will not be a worse guide than the one who knows, since he has a true opinion, though it is not knowledge. And Meno agrees, in no way worse, Socrates. Now, this is where we get into a little bit deeper analysis. Socrates continues with this question. He says, okay, so Meno, correct opinion is no less useful than knowledge, question mark? And Meno says, to this extent, Socrates, but, now let me ask you before I continue reading. What do you think? Is there any added advantage to knowing how to get to a given destination, knowing the route by heart, not needing a map or a Google Navigator, as opposed to having to rely on that external aid? Like, what would be the advantage, if any? Like, is there some additional value or benefit that comes for just knowing the route? Okay, Kat, you say prior experience or expertise. Sure. How can that assist you, though? Okay, so L, you say success. Armand, you say less time spent getting the directions. Yuki, you talk about adaptability. A, you say if an aid was not available, it would be okay. Yes, that's right. So supposing that you don't know how to get there, you might be able to if you know how to get there, you'll always make it to the destination successfully. But if you're relying on a map, even if the map is accurate, you might still not make it because you won't necessarily know whether to trust the map on all occasions, right? Even though it has correct instructions, what if there is a damaged road sign and it's hard for you to connect the detailed instructions on the map with what you're seeing in the physical environment? If you've been there so many times and you just know the route by heart, then none of these little things could throw you off and you'll just continue to get to the destination. But relying on the external aid when you just have a correct opinion, but it's not based on actual experience and knowledge having gone there, it might not always be that you get there successfully, you know? A perfect map may be equivalent to knowledge, sure, but according to at least Greek thought, you'd have to somehow internalize the content of the map and be able to understand it without having to utilize it on every occasion. So that's kind of the answer that Meno gives now in reply to Socrates' question, because the current question he's asking is this. So is a correct opinion no less useful than knowledge? Because he just got him to say you'll get there either way. You'll get there based on knowledge or you'll get there based on the mere correct opinion. So now Meno wants to try and provide his answer. He says, well, to some extent, Socrates, but, and this kind of resonates with what some of you just said, but the man who has knowledge will always succeed, whereas he who has true opinion will only succeed at times. Okay, now Socrates really wants to press the point, and so he says, but how do you mean, Meno? Won't he who has the right opinion always succeed as long as his opinion is right? It kind of reminds me of people who are just so dismissive of having like the old-fashioned knowledge, and they're like, look, we're living in a world of tools now, and so if the tools work, who cares whether you really know how to get there or not? You know, it's sort of like someone saying, do I really have to know anything? Because I can just go on Google, and Google is just common knowledge that we can all just sort of tap into at any time. So what's the difference between me being able to just search for something and having it in my mind as an item of knowledge? Well, Meno is about to relent. You know, he says that appears to be so of necessity. And now you're making me wonder, Socrates, this being the case, why is knowledge valued much higher than right opinion? And why are they different? Okay, so now Socrates finds like he's fully prepared to tell him why they're different and why it is that knowledge has this added value over and beyond just a mere correct opinion. So he says this. It's kind of a fun, it's like a little almost flex. He's like, do you know why you're wondering, or should I tell you? And Mino's like, by all means, tell me. So he says, okay, Mino, it is because you've paid no attention to the statues of Daedalus, but perhaps there are none in Thessaly. So Thessaly is where he currently lives, Mino. He says, maybe you've never heard of the statues of Daedalus, Mino? Mino says, what do you have in mind when you say this? Okay, pause, and I need to tell you a little bit about a backstory on the statues of Daedalus and who this famed figure of Athens was. So there's this, oopsie. Yeah, I have an eraser. It's in my car. I could run out to get it, but I'm just going to use tissue for the moment. If it starts to look blurry, then I'll get the real eraser. Okay, yeah, so here's the man's name that they're talking about currently. It's Daedalus, Daedalus. Okay, now, who is he? Daedalus was a famous artist, a sculptor specifically, in the world of ancient Athens, Greece. And he was known as having the most skill in creating realistic-looking statues of human figures. The realism and lifelike quality of these statues was so impressive to everybody that a kind of cultural superstition and myth developed around them. The myth was that if you were able to acquire one of these statues, these beautiful works of Daedalus, then the best thing you could do would be to tie them down into the ground with ropes. Because what they thought is that these were so realistic, these statues, that if they were not attached to the ground with ropes, then the moment you go to sleep or you're not around, they would probably just do what? If you can fill in the blank there. Yeah, they had the belief that they would somehow become animated and run away off of your property and then escape. So the advice that was given to those who acquired the statues is get ropes, because then the beautiful statue, which is beautiful with or without the ropes, will remain with you and you'll get to retain the possession of it instead of it being here today, gone tomorrow. Now, obviously, statues can't, run, but maybe in reality they're getting stolen or something. So there'd be some value to having these ropes one way or the other. Now, this becomes a metaphor which Socrates is now using to try and advance arguments as to why it's superior to have knowledge as opposed to having a mere correct opinion where there's no justification. And so he says this, the ropes kind of add value to the statue because with the ropes, the statues stay in place. They don't run away and you get to keep them. Without the ropes, you have them for now, but they're likely to go away in a short period of time because there's no ropes holding them down. This is supposed to be metaphoric for the functioning of justification. And you got it right there, Armand. True opinions are fleeting, maybe is one way to put it. They're not retained in the mind. They're easily forgotten, or you change your mind about them. But once the true opinion is grounded by evidence and justification, now it stays in your mind, and therefore it doesn't escape your mind. So the ropes stand in relation to the statues as what stands in relation to true opinions. Can you complete that analogy? A is to B as C is to D. So the ropes stand to the statues as blank stands to correct opinions. What is the metaphor of the ropes standing for? Yes, justification, exactly. Justification has a similar function as the ropes have, according to the analogy that's being advanced. They both have the function of basing the thing that they're attached to. Okay, so the statues without ropes are ungrounded. They are baseless. And that's why they can leave. In the literal sense, they're not grounded with ropes. They're not based to the ground with ropes. When you have beliefs that are, even if they're correct, that's a fine thing. But the thing is, when there's no evidence to ground them, to give foundations to them, then they escape your mind. Okay, so like we've talked about a student who happened to just randomly guess a correct answer on a multiple choice questionnaire. Now, if you ask that same student this question in 5 years, it's not like they're going to know the answer because they didn't really know it in the first place. By now, they've either forgotten the answer because it was never based on information, or they've changed their mind about it. So essentially, when you have correct beliefs, but they're not based on any evidence or justification, these are the equivalent of like lucky guesses, which can easily be forgotten, discarded, or changed in the mind. Knowledge is when a true belief is upgraded to the status of knowledge because it comes with the justification. Justified true beliefs are retained in the mind. So who's the person that doesn't just answer the question correct today, but they would do it in a month or a year or 10 years? Somebody who fills it in confidently because of their certain awareness of the evidence and reasons why it's the correct answer, okay? So now I'll read some of the words of Socrates, and you can understand now how that connects to what I've said here. So speaking to Amino, he says, it's because you paid no attention to the statues of Daedalus, but maybe there are none in Thessaly. Amino says, what do you have in mind when you say this? Socrates answers back, that they too run away and escape if one does not tie them down, but they remain in place if they are tied down. Mino's a little confused. He says, so what? And Socrates says, okay, because to acquire an untied work of Daedalus is not worth much. It's like acquiring a runaway slave because it does not remain. But it is worth much if it's tied down because his works are very beautiful. What am I saying or thinking of when I say this? True opinions. Because true opinions, as long as they remain, they're a fine thing and all they do is good. But they're not willing to remain long and they escape from a man's mind so that they are not worth much until one ties them down by giving an account of the reason why. And that, Mino, is as we previously agreed, after they are tied down in the first place, they become knowledge, and then they remain in place. That is why knowledge is valued more than a correct opinion, and knowledge differs from correct opinion because it is tied down. And now just to close it out, Mino says, by Zeus, Socrates, it does seem to be something like that. By Zeus, like the Greek ancient equivalent of like, by God, because it's like the main god in the Greek pantheon. And so then Socrates finishes by saying, indeed, I too speak as one who does not have knowledge, but is guessing. However, I certainly do not think I am guessing that right opinion is different from knowledge. If I claim to know anything, and I would make this claim about a few things, I would put that down as one of the things that I know. Rightly so, Socrates, and there the discussion ends. So what Socrates is attempting to do here is to indicate why justification plays such a crucial role in the three-part definition of knowledge. To have a correct opinion is fine because if it's correct, you get the value of having the right information, right? So like if you take a test and you just guess the right answer, you're happy because you do happen to get the credit for it. If you have a random guess as to which terminal your friend is coming out of at the airport, and then they pop out, you're like, okay, great, because my guess turned out to be correct. So it has its utility, having these correct opinions. The only issue is that they're not likely to stay for as long as you would like. They're easily forgotten or changed when they're not based on anything. Now, I find it quite interesting the way we even use language to express the concept of being justified, because it recalls to mind these metaphors of being grounded. What's a justified belief called in everyday life? Well, my belief's based on something, like the statues are literally based to the ground with ropes. Or sometimes you say, my belief has grounds to it. Well, the statue is grounded physically by the ropes. Or sometimes you say, my belief is founded on something, or it has a foundation. And again, the ropes provide this base foundation of grounding to the statue. So the metaphor is helpful in the way we use language to talk about having based beliefs, having justified, based, grounded, founded beliefs. Unfounded, baseless beliefs are like these untethered statues that are nice for the moment, but liable to leave. So many examples I can give to try and make the point. Here, I'll try one more. Suppose that I'm a lover of science fiction, and I kind of am. I love, fantasy and film on those topics. So suppose that I'm a person who would just love it if there was extraterrestrial life somewhere in the universe. So like, I hope that's true. I want it to be true, so I believe in it. But I can't say that I know it. Why not? It might be true. I might be guessing correctly, It's a big universe, and here we are. So I might be correct. You say it's big. Sorry, go ahead.
I just said no evidence.
Well, yeah, it's not that there's maybe no evidence, but there's probably not conclusive enough evidence to say this is certainly like knowledge, right?
Sure, yeah, that's what.
Exactly, yeah. So like, I'm missing the justification component. I might have a belief and suppose it's true, but I don't have enough evidence yet to like bring this across the line to say it's actually knowledge instead of just a lucky guess or a correct opinion. Now, with beliefs that don't have justification, you can change them at will, So like today, I'm looking out into the stars at night, and I'm like, wow, look at this great, big, beautiful universe. Here I am, a living thing, thinking about all this, and so there's got to be life out there. Next day, I watch some brutal, messed up, horror film, and I'm like feeling very nihilistic, and I'm like, you know what? It's just a miracle there's even one planet with life in this big dead universe. There's no life out there. I just got a cynical viewpoint on it now. And I'm flopping back and forth. But what would happen or could happen that would forever permanently set me to believe on one side of this debate? If, for example, we got what? It would be taken out of the realm of speculation and so on if the belief could be what? Just waiting for it. Yes, justified. Peachy. Yeah. So if, like, for example, tomorrow, the Mars rover, you guys know about that device out there on Mars that we put, what if tomorrow it starts beaming back images of tiny little, worm-like bacterium or creatures on the side of a rock on Mars? Now, after that, the scientific community and planet Earth, we would be like, aha, eureka, we have evidence. We have clear-cut evidence that there is actually life outside this planet. After that, you'd say, well, we know it. And the evidence that you would report on is the evidence that I'm kind of hypothetically gesturing towards. So you can keep changing your mind on a question, but once evidence is supportive of one proposition, then it kind of becomes something that you can know, and then you don't change your mind or forget it anymore. Just another way of trying to get a window into what Socrates is pointing out here. Like Socrates is saying it's better to know than to just have a lucky opinion that's correct, because without the justification, even if it is correct, it's something you might either change your mind about or simply just not retain by forgetting over time. Okay, now that's everything from this Amino article. The full dialogue of the Amino is a bit longer than this, but the extract from our textbook is the key point for studies in epistemology. I want to give us plenty of time to consider the content of the following paper that follows right after this. I'm just quickly looking at my version of the syllabus. Yes, 1 second. Actually, I've got it here on my desktop a little better. Good, Peachy. Yeah. All right, good. So yeah, the next meeting, I'll start to give you a preview and a good breakdown of what we're going to talk about in there. So we've learned about the ancient Greek account of knowledge. That's what is sometimes called the classical account, because it's like the first written rendition or analysis of what knowledge could be in the Western written historical tradition. And think about it, it remained the dominant viewpoint on what knowledge is for thousands of years, from the time of Socrates, 400 BC, all the way until randomly 1963, when this American philosopher named Edmund Gettier published this short but revolutionary paper, which basically shows that the ancient definition of justified true belief equals knowledge is not fully complete, or that it's inadequate somehow. And ever since Gettier published this short paper, some people think of it as like a keystone event. Like it divides the history of epistemology into before and after. Like there's prior to Gettier and post Gettier. And we're living in the post Gettier era now, which is a time where we're still not even sure what knowledge is anymore. We know it's justified true belief plus something else. And what that extra missing ingredient is the subject of much debate, discussion, and analysis, but no kind of consensus solution has been adopted by all. I have my own views about what might be the proper solution to the so-called Gettier problem, and we will talk about some of the possible strategies to solve the problem in future meetings. But I'm just going to try to start building up for you guys slowly how it is that Gettier challenged this classical and well-received definition of knowledge, JTB. Okay, now Armand, you're suggesting that your belief needs to be sensitive to evidence. Sure, but even if it is sensitive to the evidence and it's justified because it is, it's possible to still have a failure of knowledge. Basically, what Gettier tries to show us is that you could check off all these boxes. You could have a belief, and it's true, and it's justified. But in some cases that he thinks we can understand, you still would not have knowledge. And if it's possible to fall short of knowledge, even if you satisfied all of these required conditions, that means that the definition itself is somehow not fully satisfactory, that it's missing a condition or a criteria that is like a question mark. So it's JTB plus question mark. What's the extra feature? We're not exactly sure yet. Okay, and I mean, it's been what, like 60 years pretty much since Gettier wrote this paper, and we're still living with the sort of disturbing implications of his work. he only published one paper too. Isn't that's I think fascinating. So the guy, he published this essay that we're going to talk about. It's literally 2 pages. It's in the Journal of Philosophy called Analysis, and he never published anything before or after that. So this is amazing that he's like, it's actually broken records. It has the record for the most citations in the shortest number of words. Mr. Gettier's article here. It's been cited by like so many authors and writers ever since it was written. And to me, it's like the ultimate mic drop. He comes onto the scene. He says, "Hey guys, guess what? The classical definition of knowledge is wrong." And then he just leaves it at that. He doesn't try to solve the problem. He just points out this can of worms that now we have to contend with, which is that the definition of knowledge is somehow incomplete. And before I say a little more about the specifics of his essay here, I just want to kind of highlight again how striking and, in a way, disorienting the result is. Because if we don't know what knowledge is, then this center stage concept that lies at the heart of like all human inquiry and thought is, in a sense, an undefined idea. And it's also kind of meta, because if we don't know what knowledge is, then we don't even understand what it is that we don't have when we say that we don't know it, because knowledge and not knowing what knowledge is like a reference to the concept in the actual statement there. Okay, so let me then go ahead and start breaking down for you some of the important aspects of Gettier's paper and just giving you some info about who he was. Okay, so first of all, here is the man's name, Edmund Gettier. My cat's name is Eddie. It's not named after Edmund Gettier, but I sometimes wish that the other cat, the brother of her, was named after Edmund Gettier. When I got him, he already had the name Edwin from like the cat adoption agency, but it's kind of similar. Anyway, okay, Edmund Gettier. He was born in 1927, and he died just last year, 2021. So rest in peace to Gettier, born on Halloween in 1927. Yeah. And just recently deceased. He taught for a long time at University of Massachusetts Amherst. He's had so many grad students and dissertations that he supervised, but as I said, he just published that one short piece, a revolutionary piece, but only one. There's some like authors in literature that have that kind of status, notable writers that really only publish 1 or 2 things. I'm reminded of J.D. Salinger with The Catcher in the Rye. He did write a few other pieces, Franny and Zoe, 5 stories, but he's most well known for Catcher in the Rye. It's almost the only thing that he wrote. He's also quite a hermetic person, or he was. I'm not sure. I don't think that's true of Gettier, who was known to be quite sociable outside of the academy. Okay, so starting off, the first thing that Gettier does in his paper is he lists out the definition of knowledge that he now wants to criticize. So it's basically the ancient Greek account. And the way that he states it on page 345 of the book is like this. So the definition of knowledge, according to the Greeks, was this one. S knows that P, sorry, just gotta keep her clear for the moment, but she'll come back. S knows that P, if and only if 3 conditions are satisfied. So number 1, P, the proposition, is true. Number 2, S, the subject, believes that P. And then 3, as you know, S is justified in believing that P. So just trying to get you guys a little comfortable with the sort of jargon and terminology that's used. In this formulation of the definition of knowledge, S is just a letter that stands for the epistemic agent. That could be me, that could be you, it could be Elon Musk, President Biden, it could be anybody. So S is just a placeholder for whoever the random individual is. P is a placeholder, a variable, which stands for the proposition. And again, that can be indefinitely many possible examples. So we're just labeling it with P to stand generally for whatever proposition might be mentioned in the example. So it says S knows that P, if and only if So the words if and only if, in the textbook you would notice, if you read it, that there's capitalized IFF. And that's the logical abbreviation, notation for the phrase if and only if. In logic, if you have ever studied or if you ever do, there's a certain operator called a biconditional. And that's what if and only if stands for, the biconditional. So in logical notation, it's sometimes written IFF. I'm writing it out in the full version here so that you can see its long form version. Another equivalent phrase for if and only if is just in case. And so I often will use them interchangeably. So we could say it that way. S knows that P just in case, and then the conditions are provided below. Okay, so just in case what? Well, just in case the proposition is true, and the subject S thinks that it is true, believes the proposition. And then third, as you know, the subject S is justified in believing that proposition. Now, remember, he's just providing the account of knowledge that was stated by the Greeks at the outset so that he can clearly define for the reader, all of us, what concept that he now wants to criticize or at least evaluate. Here's something to point out for those reading the book. He offers 3 different versions of this definition on page 345, but those are not 3 different accounts or 3 different definitions. They're just 3 different ways of stating the same definition. So I don't want anybody to think, as they read that there's 3 accounts of knowledge. No, there's just one, the classical one, JTB, and it can be put in a slightly different way depending on the author. So like here, for example, Roderick Chisholm, another 20th century philosopher, he put the conditions this way. And let me see if you can judge which conditions match to which criteria of knowledge. So Chisholm said S knows that P, if and only if, number 1, S accepts P. Okay, pause. S accepts P. What do you think that is equivalent logically or synonymous with in terms of JTB? That's the belief requirement. Yes, Shad. So to believe something is to accept it. And so that's just another equivalent phrase. Chisholm goes on to say also S has adequate evidence for P. Now having adequate evidence for a proposition would be just saying what? Yes, good. Justification condition. And of course, P is true, the third condition. That's always stated the same way because there's no other real way to put that concept. Okay, so whether you talk about it in terms of S has adequate evidence for P or S accepts P versus S believes P and S is justified in P, the definition is the same. Okay, so anyway, now that we've clearly understood the account of knowledge that Gettier is taking as his point of critique, we can go on to offer a quick breakdown of some of the other stuff in the preliminary of the paper. Okay, so the next step for Gettier is to make 2 little preliminary points. Ultimately, these preliminary points help set us up for the ultimate Gettier counter examples that he's going to make the core of his paper. But we have to understand these preliminaries first. So the first 2 preliminary points, and this is like the preamble to his actual thought experiments and hypothetical examples. Okay, so 2 preliminary points. 1, that it is possible to have a justified false belief. Like that's possible, even though normally justification leads you to the truth. It's not an absolute guarantee. Sometimes you can have justification for believing something, but the evidence was misleading, or you misinterpreted the evidence and then formed a false belief from it. So anyway, it is possible. Nobody's saying it's the most probable, but it is at least possible to have a justified false belief. Okay, before I move on to the other preliminary point, I want to just sort of confer with you guys for a minute. I think maybe we've talked about examples like this before, so if that's something that's repetitive, it's okay, and you'll just be able to quickly tell me, but what could be like a situation where a person might have justification for believing something, but it's false? Okay, Yuki, you say confirmation bias, but it's not a specific enough example. I mean, what is confirmation bias? Confirmation bias is when you only seek out information that aligns with your already established views. maybe a person in that case, I mean, if we could expand on your example, you can imagine a person that's convinced that the earth is flat, so they have a biased method of research. They just go online and look at like flatearth.com, they go to like Reddit, flat earth, and they just talk to flat earth people, and they get the information they provide as their so-called justification. Maybe in that case, we could say someone has a justified but false belief. Armand, you say someone assured them that something was the case. Okay, good. So like imagine a person that you trust reports some information to you, and they're maybe doing it in order to protect you from hurting yourself. But based on what they've told you, you agree that it's true. Nonetheless, it's false. So like, I don't know, you're really mad at somebody because they stole something of yours, and somebody else told you, no, they didn't steal it from you. Actually, I've got it, because they don't want you to like go off the rails and hurt them or something. In that case, because the person told you this, you might be justified in believing their false statement, but it's still a false belief, which is justified. L, you talk about false information from social media or online. Fair example there. Suppose that there's like an internet hoax, which is spreading like wildfire, and many people believe in it, even though it's untrue. So they might then report on the widely circulated evidence as their justification for this false belief. Not to worry, I just have one student with a direct message to me about their internet connection issues. Yeah, so now that you're with hotspots, the students switch to hotspot. You should be okay. Keep in mind that I'm posting afterwards the lectures from these first 2 weeks to our Canvas page. So for any lost content, connection issues, you'll always be able to go back and review it later if you need to. But thank you. Okay, so like anyway, planted evidence when someone's framed for a crime they didn't commit, that would cause investigators to form the belief that so-and-so is guilty, but it would have been a false belief in my hypothetical case there. So anyway, guys, sometimes you could have justification, but the belief based on it is false. Usually no, because after all, why do we even want justification? Because it raises the likelihood that beliefs based on it are true. But again, it's not an absolute guarantee, and there can sometimes be misfire. All right, so the second preliminary point is a bit more complicated, and so let's take a moment to really dig into it. Okay. So this second preliminary point made by the author Gettier is this. It's called in logic and in epistemology circles the closure principle. Matteo, you say a justified false belief can't be fully justified. I mean, I don't know. Why do you say that? What is, first of all, full justification? And why couldn't it be possible? I mean, do you think that it's only possible to have a full justification when the belief is true? I wouldn't agree. Suppose that you're living in the Matrix right now. Then you'd be fully justified in believing that you're sitting in front of a computer, but really you're plugged into the Matrix and you're floating in a vat. Wouldn't you say that if that kind of skeptical scenario was true, then like all your perceptual beliefs would be justified because, that's how things appear. The appearing world would be the evidence that you have that things are just as so. So like, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I would argue that, yeah, you can certainly have a justified false belief. Whether it's fully justified or not, perhaps is a detail that could be debated on, but I don't see why the strength of justification couldn't possibly be maximum, even when you have false beliefs, because sometimes there's extremely compelling evidence for something which is false, But anyway, it's just something to contemplate further. I like the suggestion. Shad, you asked this. Would you call justification and truth without belief simply denial? Or is it even possible? Okay, well, justification when there's no belief isn't really justification that that person has, right? Because if they had the justification, then they would be aware of this evidence and information that makes the probability of the belief being true higher. I sometimes think that you have to first believe something before we can evaluate the quality of your evidence for or not having that belief, Yuki, what you say is this: sometimes a lack of one fact can lead to wrongful justification. Sure, yes. Kind of like when people believe the Earth to be the center of the galaxy. Right. When you take a few points of data and you try to follow them to a valid conclusion, sometimes you can make the wrong inference, So there could be like two unique people who have a very rare shoe, and that shoe print was seen at the murder scene of the crime. And and then because of other information about one of the two accused or suspected people, they're wrongly picked as a suspect, so I don't know. In each case where you have a justified but false belief, there's some inference that is made, which is an incorrect inference, but not necessarily one that you could be blamed for because it was reasonable to infer. All right, but anyway, the second big preliminary point in Gettier's essay, but thanks for these questions, they're very good. The second preliminary point is, I was saying, the closure principle. Okay. Okay, so just full disclosure, the first time you look at this so-called closure principle, you might find it to be a little bit jargony and technical, but that's fine. Once I explain it, I hope much of it will make clear sense to you, but there's some level of complexity that can't be totally eliminated. Therefore, let's just dive right in. Here's what it says. And again, never mind the jargony appearance of some of it, because we're going to go back through it and go break it down piece by piece. So, okay then. What it says is this: if S, some subject, is justified in believing a proposition P, okay, if S is justified in believing P, and, okay, there's a couple clauses here, and P, the proposition they're justified in believing, entails another proposition Q, and S, the subject, deduces Q from P, then in that case, if all these prior conditions are met, then S, the subject, is also justified in believing Q, the second proposition, and I'll explain. Okay, so if S is justified in believing P, P entails Q, S deduces Q from P, then under those conditions, S is also justified in believing Q. Now, for us to fully understand this, a few things have to be unpacked. First off, we all have to kind of come to understand what it means for one proposition to entail another. Like, so what is this logical relationship of entailment? Let me go over that. Okay, so entailment is a logical relationship that holds between two propositions, or two sentences if you prefer. And it's a word that many of us have heard before, maybe even used in certain cases, without being maybe 100% sharp on the logical, precise meaning of it. But I'm guessing that some of you might even have an intuition as to how it is interpreted or defined. So suppose that I have two statements, A and B, and I tell you that A entails B, all right? What do you think this means? And I'll help you by getting you started. If A entails B, then if A is true, what do you think that means? Or what does that imply or guarantee? So say A entails B. Given that, if A is true, yes, Elias, that means that B must also be true, correct? I'll put that definition of entailment here to the left of the board, and then we'll come up with some examples. Just give me a second to slide over here. Okay, so here we go. If A, some proposition, we're just labeling it with letter A, but if it entails the second proposition B, then in that case, if A is true, B must also be true. Okay. Now, going off of that definition, let me see if you can follow along with some of the little examples. Okay, so let me tell you one thing which is true about me. Sad to say, but I was born in the 80s, okay, guys? I'm pretty old. Now, that's true. That's a proposition. So take A to be the proposition. Dr. Vulich was born in the 80s. Can you tell me a second proposition which is entailed by that? There's many things that are entailed by that, but something that has to be true given the fact that I was born in the 80s. If Vulich was born in the 80s, that entails at least something like what? Maybe think of math. I don't know. Dr. Vulich was alive in the 90s. Sure, Aya, yes. Since we're now together in 2022, you can say that if I was born in the 80s, currently living, I must have been alive in the 90s. Sure, that's fine. Well, Colin, no. You see, oh, that I meant most. Okay, sorry. I thought you said exactly. Yeah, so I guess if I was born in the 80s, that is a fair point. If I was born in the 80s, then today, the most age I could possibly have, say I was born like on the first day of January 1st, 1980, then I would at least be, I would have to be no older than like 42 in 1 month right now. Now, Aya, I don't know why you felt uncomfortable with your first example, because if I was born in the 80s, it does entail that I was alive in the 90s, since it's after the 90s now and I'm still alive. But I guess it also entails that I was alive in the 80s. I mean, but that's almost like equivalent to the first statement. Like that's like saying that I was born in the 80s entails that I was born in the 80s, which is true, but it's a trivial implication. I was kind of fishing around for this. Let me guide you towards it, but these are fine responses so far. Somebody that's born in the 80s has to be at least older than, let me throw out a number. Does it entail that I'm at least 30? Sure, I was alive before the first Apple phone was released because the 80s are before that time. Greater than 30, sure. So if I was born in the 1980s, and I was, then the statement that I'm older than 30 today has to be true, right? Just because that's how mathematics works. There's no way someone could be born in the 80s talking to you today and they're in their 20s. You know, that's just impossible because of the number of years in between all time points within the 80s and then the current time and date. So like just one example. My advisor, Sven Bernecker, who taught me so many things in grad school, he made this example. I don't know, it's a weird example, but it works. So dogs, right? They're all mammals. They're all a member of the mammal class of beings. Warm-blooded, live birth, etc., except for some notable exceptions. Let's not worry about those. So dogs are all mammals. Now, suppose that you're petting a dog. That's proposition A. That entails that you're also what? If you're petting a dog, it logically implies that you are what? Petting a mammal, correct. Does the entailment work the other way? Suppose I know I'm petting a mammal, I'm just blind and I'm touching someone with fur. Does it entail that I'm petting a dog? No, because not all mammals are dogs, but all dogs are mammals. Okay? Yes, yeah. As long as a person was born in the 80s and still alive, then they're at least 30 today. So good. You sort of see the example I was giving prior to this, which is that if one statement entails another, then the truth of the first will guarantee the truth of the second. So suppose that I was petting Peachy right now, you know, a cat. Cats are all mammals too. Then it would also be entailed that I'm petting a mammal, because there's no way to pet a cat without petting a mammal. And there's no way to pet a dog without petting a mammal. So one statement entails another. I'm just trying to work this over with a few different possible examples to make it as clear as I can. But I hope it's coming into focus. If A entails B, then the case of A being true logically guarantees that B is true as well. Okay. I'm born in the 80s. You're born in the 2000s, let's suppose. Now that conjunction implies that Vulich is older than you, right? So there's no way that the first proposition, I'm from 80s, you're from 2000s, can be true, and yet it be false that I'm older than you. So anyway, entailment, just getting you a little bit familiar and comfortable with that idea. It's a well-known idea of logic, and we use it all the time when we reason, you know? Like if you, I don't know, have your phone and, well, here's something, okay? I can maybe use an example from today. I lost my hydro flask today, and I know that I had it in the classroom where I was teaching at because I have a distinct memory of taking a drink from it right before I started the lecture. So let's see. Since I drank from the hydro flask in the classroom, that entails that I did not leave it here at my house before I left home, you know? Because if it was in the classroom, it couldn't have been in my house the whole time. So like I'm reasoning from one thing to another. Suppose that Jones's foot, let me say fingerprint, a little more clear evidence. Jones's fingerprint is at the crime scene. That entails that he was there at the crime scene, you know, because if his fingerprint was there, that means that he had to have been there. Okay. And Armand, good. You could pet a animal that was not a dog, sure. We talked about how the entailment doesn't go in the opposite way. All right then, so now back to this. This whole big discussion was just a sidebar where I was trying to make entailment clear to you. But now this will come into clear focus too. So all the closure principle is saying is the following thing. Beneath all the technicalities, it's all really saying this. Suppose you're justified in believing one statement. then you notice that that statement implies something else. Like, for example, right now you're justified in believing that I was born in the 80s. Why? Because you've heard it from me, and that's the evidence. If someone asked you, how do you know this man was born in the 80s? You'd say, well, he told me himself, so I got it straight from the horse's mouth. Now, that's a justified belief. And if you're like logical, and then you sit back and you're like, well, you know, he was born in the 80s, that entails that he's older than 30. You know, you're trying to do a guesswork about my age. That second proposition does follow from the first. So all this says is that if you then infer the entailed proposition from the initial one, you're now justified in believing that second proposition. So the justification you have for one proposition, it's like it transfers over to a second proposition which you deduce from the first. Okay, so the closure principle, sometimes epistemologists say like justification is closed under known entailment, right? So if you're justified in believing an initial statement, and then you see what it implies, you will also be justified in believing that secondary statement. So to use the example we've given already, you are currently justified in believing that your Professor Vujic is born in the 80s, and therefore you're also justified in believing that I'm older than 30, because that is a logical implication of being born in the 80s. So whatever evidence that you have, which is good enough for you to be justified in believing the first claim, that same evidence is clearer justification for the second claim. Okay? All right, closure principle. And let me just try to put it one more time in a slightly different way of phrasing. Justification transfers through. When you're justified in believing one fact, and you notice that it implies a second one, then you'll be justified in believing that second one. Okay? Okay, good. So now, with all those pieces in place, we're ready to say a few words about at least the first Gettier case. In Gettier's essay, there's two examples that he gives. Both of them are intended to give us this result. A subject has a justified true belief, and yet they still do not have knowledge. If that can be shown through examples, which is what Gettier's going for, then that means that JTB does not equal K, because it would show that you can have all of the conditions met and still fall short of knowledge. So that's like the point of Gettier's examples, to show us that this is true. The justified true belief is not always the same as knowledge, because once again, you can have a belief, have it be true, have evidence for it, and yet you still do not know that proposition, at least in certain kinds of scenario. Okay, so here we go. These are the Gettier cases. That's sometimes what they're called in the literature. And Gettier has got two of them, but after he wrote this paper, there's like infinitely many that have been spawned by so many different epistemologists out there. But we got to learn the classic two, especially case one, the first one. So here's Gettier's case one. It's a hypothetical scenario. He calls it case one. It's a pretty dry, dull title, so I'm going to add a little bit of color to that. Let us call it Smith and Jones job hunt. Okay, now everybody, I may have said this before, but if it can't be repeated enough, if I haven't said it, then let's make sure we know this. In philosophy, especially in the world of epistemology, but really across the board, metaphysics, ethics, there's heavy use of hypothetical scenarios to construct arguments and to advance conceptual points. Sometimes they are called hypothetical scenarios. That's kind of my preferred term, but a lot of philosophers use the phrase thought experiments. These hypothetical scenarios, thought experiments, whatever you want to call them, in many cases, they're far removed from reality. They're like not realistic, or they're not something that you would expect to ever really happen. And to some students of philosophy, that's a little frustrating. You know, you'd like the examples to have a little more of a real world feel to them, but it's really not important at the end of the day whether they bear resemblance to reality or not, because the only reason we advance these examples is in order for you to focus your mind on certain key features of an argument or concept. So just know that I'm about to tell you about a very weird hypothetical scenario. Some parts of it are pretty ordinary, but some parts are quite strange. And it's not at all the last time that you're going to hear such kind of scenarios presented in this class, or if you study philosophy across the board, you're going to keep seeing examples like that. So just know that's a trade and tool craft of philosophy writing and study. Okay, anyway, case one, Smith and Jones job hunt. So there's a few characters in this hypothetical. We've got Smith and Jones, so here they are. Smith Here's the other dude, Jones. Now, Smith and Jones, here's what they're doing. They are finalists for a position at a company, and they both are applicants. They both interviewed for it. They've narrowed it down to these two candidates. And basically, one of them will be taken and chosen for the position, and one will not. Oh, by the way, I don't want to make a big deal about it, but Kat, you said Dr. Village must be over 32. Is that really true? What if I was born on December 31st, 1989? Then I guess, yeah, you're right. Anyway, I would be 32. My bad. Okay, thank you. So yeah, back to this. Smith and Jones. Smith and Jones, there's one more character in our scenario here. It's the boss. It's the boss. So here's the big boss guy. Actually, let me kind of create a little extra room here. Boss. So this is the guy that does the interviews for the two subjects and gets to make the final choice who's going to be selected for the position. Now, Smith has a belief at this stage of the example. The interviews were conducted. He's spoken to both of them. And after all that, Smith has this belief in his mind. So I'm going to try and show it to you like as though it's a thought bubble. So here's the belief of Mr. Smith. It is this proposition that Jones, the other guy, will get the job. And, so it's a conjunction statement, which means it's an and sentence. Jones will get the job, and second part, Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Okay, so Smith believes this proposition, and just to give a sentence letter to stand for it, Gettier labels it Proposition D. So this is Proposition D, believed by Smith, that Jones will get the job and that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Now I'm going to tell you, why does Smith believe that? Okay, well, this is a justified belief that Smith has, actually. There's, in other words, good reason for him to believe it, and here's why. So after the interviews were all finished up, let's suppose like Jones leaves the room for a moment to like use the restroom, and Jones and Smith were waiting in the lobby waiting room, waiting for the final decision to come back about who was hired. But Jones excuses himself for a minute, and during that little time period, the boss has a private moment with Smith. And so let's suppose that the boss comes over to Smith and he's like, hey, Smith, I just want to tell you something while we have a moment here by ourselves. I'm sorry to disappoint you and everything, but I've made up my mind already. I'm going to go with Jones. So sorry to say that, but I know you wanted this position really badly. Nonetheless, I just feel like Jones is the better fit for our company and for the title. So just hang on, though, for a minute. I want you guys to both be here when we make the formal announcement, but just giving you a heads up, Smith, wanted to kind of let you know personally that I'm going to go with Jones, actually. Okay, so you heard that? Like, why is it then that Smith believes Jones will get the job? Well, because he heard the boss say so directly to him. And he has no reason to distrust this guy. He's the one who hires, after all, and makes the choice. So that's the reason behind why Smith thinks that Jones will get the job. Now, what about the second part, where Smith believes that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket? That part's just a little weird, and there's no real easy way to just make it realistic sounding. So here's how that goes down. Also, after the interviews, Smith looks over at Jones. They're like, say, waiting in the lobby together, and he's like, hey, buddy Jones, tough interview, huh? Jones like, yeah. Smith's like, actually, totally unrelated. This is random. I have a question for you, Jones. Do you have any coins right now in your pocket? And Jones is like, let's see. Yeah, actually, I guess I do. And Smith's like, I know it's random, but how many of them do you have in your pocket? Could you let me know? And Jones is like, Smith's like, you know what? I'm going to count them. So Smith goes over and he counts the coins in Jones' pocket, okay? Let's understand that that's what happens. Like, he physically counts the coins out of Jones, the other guy's pocket. And what does he notice? He's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, you got 10. Thanks, man. Here you go. You can have them back. I just kind of wanted to know. I was just curious. Maybe I'm a little nervous. Wanted to know how many coins you had in your pocket. Okay, so why did he do that? Don't worry about it. It's just part of the hypothetical. All you need to know is he asks Jones how many coins he has, but then he counts them and he sees there's 10, right? So anyway, that is the background as to why Smith developed this belief that Jones will get the job and that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. And long story short, just take this point away, that that's justified for Smith to believe for the reasons that I mentioned. The two reasons. First of all, the statement of the boss that it will be Jones. And secondly, the physical act of counting with his own hands and eyes the coins of Jones' pocket, which were 10 in number. Okay? So far, so good, guys? Just building the case up. Like, so we have a scenario here where Mr. Smith believes this statement D, and it's justified. Now, this is when the closure principle stuff is going to kick in, everyone. Okay, so like looking at proposition D, Smith notices that it entails a related proposition which just has slightly different wording. Okay, so let me go ahead and put that over here. D entails proposition, we'll call it E, because Gettier does. Proposition E says this. It just replaces the name Jones with the generic label, the man. So all that E says is the man who gets the job. Has 10 coins in his pocket. Sorry for the limitations of space on the board, but anyway, that's proposition E. D entails E. So what we learned about entailment, right, was that if one proposition entails another, then if the first one is true, the second one has to be true. And that is correct here. If D is true, that Jones gets the job and has 10 coins in his pocket, then yes. Then in that case, the man who gets the job, Jones, has 10 coins in his pocket. So if D is true, E comes along for the ride and it's true as well. So D entails E. Now the closure principle, remember, it says what? That if you're justified in believing an initial proposition, and then you deduce an entailed proposition from it, then you will be what with respect to the second proposition? What happens when you deduce one statement from another, which was initially justified? What's the status of the second statement then for the believer, for the subject? Just if you can tell me. Yes, so then the second proposition will also be justified. Good. Now remember, guys, how we established that D was justified? Because the boss told him he'll hire Jones and because Smith counted the coins in Jones' pocket. Now, Smith has deduced E from D. So according to the closure principle, you guys follow me? Smith is now justified in believing E because the justification has carried through from D to E. So all of his evidence based on the boss's report and the act of counting Jones' coins justifies not only D, but also E, which follows logically from it. Okay? So long story short, Smith is justified in believing E. Correct? Good. Now, in every single Gettier case, as they're sometimes called, there's like this kind of weird plot twist effect at the end, where the target proposition ends up being true, but for a reason that was not expected by the subject. And we see that same feature here. So here's how the little plot twist plays out, guys. So boss comes back into the lobby where the two finalists are waiting for their final word. And he's got his hand stretched out like for the old-fashioned handshake to congratulate the winner. But he's walking straight past Jones, and he's got this big beaming smile headed straight at Smith. And Smith's a little confused because he just was told that it would be Jones hired. But the boss, approaching Smith, says, "Hey, Smith, congratulations, my friend. I'm just a big joker. I like to sort of get a rise out of people, see how they react to things. So earlier when I was telling you I was going to hire Jones, I'm such a big joker. I was just kidding. I was just playing. I wanted to sort of see how you would react. But now I'm being real with you. Congratulations, Smith. You were the candidate I wanted all along. So you can start tomorrow, and here's all the information about your salary and your duties. So nice. Congrats. Smith got the job unexpectedly because earlier he was told something different by the boss. Now, this is the point where it just so turns out that Smith also, in his own pocket, which he was totally unaware of and which he had not counted, but it randomly by coincidence turns out that he also, what do you think? Mr. Smith also what? See if you can finish the little hypothetical. Yeah, so Smith also has 10 coins in his pocket. He also had 10 coins, but he didn't count those coins. He was not aware that he had 10 coins. But let's consider this statement E. Going back to E. Question. Did Smith believe E? Yes, because he deduced it from D. We already established that. Was Smith justified in believing E? Well, also yes, due to the closure principle and the transferal of justification through from D to E, he's justified and he does believe E. Now, this is key. Does E turn out to be true in the end? Yes, because it matches the facts. Did the man who gets the job have 10 coins in his pocket? Yeah. Because who got the job? Well, Smith. And did he have 10 coins in his pocket? Yes. But now we get to the real point. Would we be comfortable saying that Smith knew that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket? Wait, so some questions, Colin. But it's also true that the man that had 10 coins did not get the job. That's not the statement, though. The statement is not the man who has 10 coins gets the job. The statement is the other way around. The man who gets the job has 10 coins, because it's not as if Smith has counted the coins in everybody's pocket, and he's in a position to make the claim that anybody with 10 coins gets the job, because he's only looking at Jones as the person that got it. No, that's fine. That's actually good that you asked that, Colin, because I've noticed that's a common misunderstanding that can sometimes seep into the student's analysis of the essay. Han, your question. So does that mean that Jones does not have 10 coins, or he still has 10 coins? Yeah, Jones still has 10 coins, but again, Han, you're kind of following the same little error that Colin had, which is that you're thinking the proposition was the man that has 10 coins gets the job. It is instead, say it the right way, the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Okay, that's the proposition which is believed and which is justified and true for Smith to believe. Yes, good. So this is a what in the end. It is a justified, true belief. It's believed by Smith. It's justified because of the evidence that he has for D, which transfers through to E. And it is the fact that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. But let's get to the big upshot. Do you think it sounds common sense to say that under these conditions, Smith knew that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket? Did he know that? No, he didn't know it. He got it right. He was justified in believing it, but it's not knowledge, because the thing is, it's just random coincidence, isn't it, that that belief turned out to be true, given the evidence that he used to formulate the belief. Because all of his evidence was derived from information about Jones, right? He thinks Jones will get the job, and he's aware that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. He does not think that he will get the job, nor does he even know that he himself has 10 coins in his pocket. So the fact that this ends up matching reality is a total random coincidence, isn't it? Because the evidence that led him to form this belief is unrelated to the factors which make it true. This is based on all kinds of evidence pertaining to Jones, but it's actually true because of information that bears on Smith himself, of which he himself was unaware. So like, for example, if Smith had any other number of coins in his pocket randomly, 8, 9, 11, 1, 2, then he would have not had a justified true belief. It would have been false, because the man that got the job under those circumstances would not have had 10 coins in his pocket. So isn't it just random that though he counted the coins of the other candidate's pocket, who he assumed would get the job, it also corresponded to the number he had, and he himself got the job unexpectedly. Armand, you say this: he wasn't convinced and confident that he'd get the job, reasonably so, and he'd had acceptable justification for believing he wouldn't get it. Yes, but Armand, keep this in mind. The question isn't about him getting the job. The question is whether he had justification to believe that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. And he is justified in believing that on the presumption that he thought it would be Jones. Okay, so no way to deny this is justified. Like, if you ask Smith why do you believe that, it's not like he's just going to shrug his shoulders and be like, random guess. He's going to say, well, here's why. The boss told me he'll give Jones the job. I counted the coins in Jones' pocket, so I have ample reason to believe this. And it does turn out to be true, but for the wrong reason, you see. He got led to the correct belief, but on the basis of mismatching evidence. And so in cases like this, what Gettier believes we can all agree with is that there is a justified true belief, but it's not knowledge. It's a JTB that is not equivalent to K. And if that's possible in this case, then that shows us that the definition itself has not been accurately stated yet. If you can have a justified true belief and not yet have knowledge, then what's missing? That means there's some unstated condition that has not yet been put on the table yet. So knowledge really then, according to Gettier and all the post-Gettier commentators, is justified true belief plus question mark, some mysterious fourth condition that has not been settled on. This additional condition has to be something that prevents luck from being the factor which makes the belief true in the end. Because intuition of all is that knowledge is not compatible with luck. It's supposed to be like skillful appreciation of evidence leading you to the true belief. But no one is quite yet able to assert or fully frame the issue of what an anti-luck condition would be like. We'll try to get into some discussion of that as we build up this class. But that is the deep and puzzling issue. So I know it's a very weird and unrealistic hypothetical. Like in real life, no. Generally, people don't count the coins in other people's pockets and all the rest. But it's getting at a very deep and vexing problem. Like if we don't understand what knowledge is, if it's something beyond and over justified true belief, then we are right now in a weird moment where the concept of knowledge is somehow slipping through our fingers and we are missing some important element of its essential definition. Now, let me just go ahead and give you a variation on the Gettier case really fast. One thing I like to do is to sometimes state Gettier cases that are more realistic. You know, philosophers, or professional philosophers and so on, don't really mind the highly unrealistic, removed, detached from reality nature of some of these examples. But I know for students, it can sometimes make it hard to relate to. So like, here's another case that struck me in real life, and therefore it's definitely realistic. And it's a Gettier case, okay, based on my own experience. So I told you that I used to drive a black BMW, and I did until last semester. Anyway, one time I was parking in a parking lot of one of the schools where I teach. Oh yeah, sorry, but let me get to the question above before I mention this point. Mateo. So proposition D does not need to be true. No, good. Remember the initial preliminary that Gettier took some trouble to make sure we were all clear on, that you can have a justified but false belief, and that's what this is. This is justified but false belief, but the justification for it still is present, and it can still trace through to what you deduce from it or infer from it. That's right. Now, Colin, you propose that it could be justified true belief plus a correlation between the propositions. There's something about that that we will explore, yes, in upcoming meetings, so keep that thought in mind. And then L, you say, how is prop E true if prop D was never true? Prop E is true because it's correct. The man that gets the job does have 10 coins in his pocket, but the transmission of justification can happen from a false proposition to one that ends up becoming true, yes. So hopefully that's clarificatory a little bit. Anyway, yeah, we only have a few minutes. I just wanted to quickly just spit out this random, realistic Gettier case, and we'll continue on the same theme on Thursday, because a lot of what I've talked to you about today was actually a little bit of an early, advanced preview of some of the Gettier material. Okay, anyway, I used to drive a black BMW. Sometimes I would park in one parking lot at a campus where I'm teaching, and I'd be kind of in a rush because I'm arriving late. So I need to run out of the parking lot and get to my classroom fast. So I don't take like a clear mental note of which aisle that I parked in. So say now I'm getting back, and this has really happened to me. So I get back to the parking lot and I'm like, which aisle did I park my car in? Then I spot a car that's apparently mine. You know, it's the same make and model of black BMW. So looking at that car, I form what belief? That my car is in that aisle, okay? I believe at that time my car is in that aisle. Now, when I got closer to the car, I actually realized something, that that's not my car. That's just another black BMW that looks quite similar to my own. But once I got close to it, I noticed that 2 stalls over in the same aisle, which I had not seen before, there actually was what? If you can finish my little real scenario. That was my BMW, yeah, my car. So let's go back to the belief that I had initially. What was this proposition that I believed? Well, Armand, no. Let's help our students that my car is in that aisle. Car A is my car would be false, not true. Okay, but my car is in that aisle is true. So that's the one we're looking at. And my car was in that aisle, yes. And was my car in that aisle? Yes, so it was believed and it was true. And did I have reason to believe that it was in that aisle? Well, yes, because I had the visual perception of the decoy car. That was my justification. So I actually had a justified true belief that my car was in that aisle. But do you guys kind of vibe with this? Do you think I knew that my car was in that aisle in that case? Was that knowledge that it was in the aisle? It wasn't knowledge. It was a justified true belief. But again, it was just a coincidence, wasn't it? Because I was relying on the evidence derived from the other car that wasn't mine. And that somehow, just by coincidence, led me to a correct belief, which is that my car is in that aisle. So it's another example like Gettier's original, where someone gets to a true belief based on evidence, but it's like the wrong evidence. You know, the evidence that I used was not seeing my actual car. So if my car hadn't been in that aisle, I still would have thought that it was, because I was relying on the decoy. Okay, and so all the Gettier cases are like that. Someone is led to a true belief with reasonable evidence, so it's a JTB in the end, but the factors which cause it to be true, the truth makers, are not the same as the evidential factors that provide justification. Like, so in the original Gettier case, what makes this true is everything having to do with Smith and the content of his pocket. But the evidence that Smith utilizes to get there is all this stuff about Jones, which is actually partially false. The thought that Jones would get the job is justified, but still false. So anyway, guys, that's enough for today's meeting. We've covered some good ground. We're just building up this Gettier case, and that takes a while to articulate. On Thursday, we'll go further into the Gettier examples. Yeah, I mean, they got lucky. They're lucky to get it right. But the thought of knowledge is supposed to be like skill, you know? Like if you fire an arrow at the side of a barn and then you draw a bullseye around it, no one says you're a great marksman because, you know, you just draw the circle around wherever it happens to land. And even a person that's, you know, just randomly firing an arrow could possibly hit a target. But we wouldn't say they knew what they were doing unless they could reliably do it under altered conditions and slightly varied conditions. So in the Gettier case, this guy's got a true belief. But if the world was slightly different, where he had 9 coins in his pocket, the same method of forming the belief wouldn't have been true, but rather false. And when you have knowledge, it's supposed to be sensitive to the evidence, like you said earlier, Armand. But we'll expand on this further on Thursday. So basically, guys, just want you to have a nice afternoon until we see each other next time. I'll send you the link for the Thursday Zoom meeting, like this one was sent to you, and I'll also send you the recording of today's lecture. After that, next Tuesday, we'll be in person in class at the Literature and Languages Social Sciences building. You'll see the room number in the syllabus. I'm not looking at it right now, but there it is. So anyway, guys, I'm going to let you go for the moment. Fun meeting, interesting discussion. Let me hear you just say goodbye, or at least type it out. Thank you so much. Just keep in mind to stay in touch with the announcements. I'll just be sending you some links later, probably later tonight. One quick question, Yuki. I could take it quickly. What is that?
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you.
Just making sure. So like, just like I have an example just in case to help me understand this better.
Sure.
So if somebody is accusing somebody of murder,
Yeah.
and there was like a DNA evidence that the machine said that, okay, it was this person,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you accuse that person,
Yeah.
and then you tell them that we have DNA evidence.
Yes.
And then that person confesses and says, okay, yeah, it was me that murdered that person. But later on, you find out the machine was faulty and it was broken and it wasn't actually giving the right like DNA evidence,
Right.
but you still got the person to confess. So then it's
Yeah,
still
but
the
it's a
truth.
false
Is it like that?
confession, though. So it doesn't really stand as the proper kind of example, because the Gettier examples are where all the conditions are met. So you have truth as one of the conditions. JTB requires T. So your example is one where a person has a justified belief, which is false, but it's also backed by the false confession of the individual. You see what I mean? Does that help?
But
you
what
a
if
little
that person did actually murder that person? It's just the fact that he didn't know what the DNA evidence was, so he actually did believe that, oh, I guess they do have DNA evidence against me, so I guess I should just confess so I could have a lower sentence. So he actually does like explain what he did and actually says that he actually did do it.
Mm-hmm.
Full confession, you know.
Yeah.
But then later on, you find out that the evidence that the person.
Okay. I think I understand you in this case. So let me get your hypothetical clear. The person did commit the murder, in fact. So this is not a false confession. They're truly stating that they did it. They think that there is compelling evidence, which is in the possession of like investigators. So this is why they confess. Later on, though, it is discovered that that was actually incorrect DNA evidence, but as a happy accident, the person who confessed really was the guilty party. So I guess you're talking about, in that case, a belief which is true and justified, but like, say, for example, do the jurors know this? Because they were relying on evidence that was itself like false evidence. I mean, that's, I guess, a possible kind of Gettier case. You know, the person has a justified true belief, but the original justification is somehow like different from what actually proves that the person did the crime. I have to think on your example a little bit further, but it seems generally fine. You know, in all Gettier cases, those kind of features are what you're looking for. Someone is led to believe something which is true, but the evidence which leads to this is different from the real factors that make it true. And so I guess that's a fine example. You know, you believed you had DNA evidence, but it was filed under the wrong name. It appears to indicate guilt of the guilty accused party, and they really did do it. But you wouldn't say that you knew it if you were in possession of the wrong evidence. I think that's fair. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, got
Yeah,
it.
very
Just
good.
making sure.
No, it's good. They're all interesting and detailed hypotheticals, so I just wanted to pursue it to its conclusion. Okay, guys, thanks again, and to everybody here, I appreciate you being at the meeting, and I'll see you back on Thursday. So see you then.
Bye, Doctor.
Bye. Thank you. See you soon. Thanks.